Hello, everyone. It is March 27, 2024. Welcome back to Metropolis, hosted by myself, Calden Datsimpa. Today's guest, Lital Khaikin. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. I had a nice lunch today. Since you asked, I had a chicken sandwich. Lital, we have you on today. We have you wrote this interesting article in Pivot. If we could go to the first slide, we have a little picture of it here. So here we have de plus en plus dur d'accéder aux services sociaux et de santé dans Hochelaga-Maisonneuve. So here you have this article in Pivot where you talk about the increasing difficulty of accessing social and health services in Hochelaga-Maisonneuve. Mm-hmm. Could you, I guess to start off this conversation, I want to thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
To actually get into it, could you give a little background on this, on the neighborhood, on the impetus for this article, and mm-hmm. So yeah.
Okay, yeah. So the article is it's kind of situated within a bigger picture of the privatization of the Quebec's health sector and the kind of the erosion of public health and social services. Mm-hmm. And it's, obviously having an effect on different neighborhoods, Hochelaga-Maisonneuve being one of them. And yeah, as we've seen, like over the fall, over the winter, strikes in the public health and social services network show that working conditions are deteriorating. This is obviously having an impact on the actual services being provided in centers that do exist, in institutions that exist. And it's also incentivizing like poor working conditions, low wages, or wages that aren't keeping up with inflation are incentivizing workers in the sector to go toward the private sector. And this is basically creating gaps that are, which is what this article kind of talks about, community organizations are sort of filling the gaps. This should not be happening. Mm-hmm. The services should be provided by the public health and social services network, but here we are. So just to kind of illustrate some of the gaps that are present, it's the loss of an inability to retain like family doctors, mm-hmm. Youth psychologists, therapists, counselors, nurses, and often also administrative staff. And the administrative angle is where a lot of the community organizations are kind of stepping in, formally and informally.
It's really across the board, then across these a lot of different sectors of health and social services that is sort of deteriorating. Then
yeah, absolutely. And obviously, community service organizations can't step in and do everything. Like they're sort of they're patching in where it's appropriate. Mm-hmm. But yeah, basically because the public health and social services network is unable to serve the community, the services are kind of being, the gaps are being patched somewhat haphazardly. So just to also kind of give a little bit more information, a report by La Table de Quartier Hochelaga-Maisonneuve. I'm just going to refer to them as La Table.
Yes.
So La Table and le Comité des usagers de CSSS Lucille Teasdale, mm-hmm. They describe that Hochelaga-Maisonneuve is marked by inequalities in the public health and social services sector. There's been a lot of reporting, in mainstream media to some degree, basically restating the same thing, that it's marked by inequalities, and it's been referred to as a little bit of a medical desert. It's this is especially pronounced with the lack of family doctors. According to their report, just over 42% of men who are covered in the survey don't have a family doctor, and just over 23% of women who are in the report don't have a family doctor. To access hospitals, people in Hochelaga-Maisonneuve have to go to Hôpital Maisonneuve-Rosemont mm-hmm. or Hôpital Notre-Dame. Both of these are quite far. You do have to rely on public transit or, get a cab or Uber.
Sure. Which is
So-
costly.
Yes, absolutely. And so they're in theory accessible, but in practicality, like, if you can't afford public transit, it makes it very difficult, and the distance is quite significant.
That's a lengthy walk, I believe, to
Absolutely.
both of those hospitals.
Yeah. I'll talk about that a little bit later as well, because
Sure,
people do have to basically walk very long distances or leave the neighborhood entirely to access services. But some other things are long wait times. This is common knowledge, but there are long wait times for youth psychosocial counseling. This was brought up in the interviews for the article, that youth have to wait around 6 months to access services, or they have to go to Rosemont. Also, again, it's quite far, but one aspect that was mentioned was just, again, sort of an emotional toll to, like, you have to go out of your home neighborhood
Of course.
in an already vulnerable state and get services somewhere that's unfamiliar, and that can be quite stressful. And
Even that 6 month wait is that can be very I think very long for someone in that kind of state.
absolutely, 6 months. This is youth. For adults, it's also like somewhere between 1 to 2 years.
Oh wow, yeah.
So it's quite dire, and this was public mental health services in Hochelaga-Maisonneuve, waiting time of 1 to 2 years.
Yeah, wow.
I think Emmanuel Cri from the Organisation Populaire des Droits Sociaux had mentioned something like 800 to 900 people on the waiting list, approximately. So it's that should give you an idea of scale. It's a lot of people, and that is a very long time.
Yeah, even just for 2 hospitals, that's like, even if it was like they had a 3rd hospital there, that's quite the patient list for them.
This is I believe he referred to the CLSC, so it's more like the community.
Oh, right.
But same.
Yeah, I mean it's especially I guess with the that goes to show the kind of like this extra, I guess the extra mental load, emotional load of kind of like living these times. Our infrastructure, our kind of health infrastructure, is clearly not really able to deal with that extra burden.
And definitely, I mean, we'll talk about this in a second as well, but the infrastructure, like the actual, sort of built environment and the changing actual environment is also creating additional stresses.
Everything's cracking.
And what this is basically showing is that these are some of the gaps that already exist and that are being exacerbated. So this is where community organizations are kind of stepping in, and this is where this article kind of comes in to talk about that, and the organizations sort of talk about where they stepped in or what their observations are. So basically where the community organizations are patching gaps, some of that work is administrative. So that's booking appointments, navigating online platforms to set rendezvous, filling out forms for social assistance applications. And in some cases, they're also providing services. So having like a nurse on site.
Sure. Part of that work is helping community members sort of navigate navigate these health systems.
Yeah, right. And in the case of having a nurse on site, that's at the Centre de Marie Debout. I'll introduce them in a bit, but they do have a nurse on site for 1 day a month for sexual health. And it's both. It's kind of a double-edged sword. Like it's both good in terms of having a service for the community, but it's also it's 1 day a month.
Yeah, that's. Has its limits.
It has its limits. It's sexual health. It can be difficult to address emergencies, especially if you don't want to go to more like formal medical health. Or,
of course.
Kind of expose yourself to the Quebec's public health system.
It sounds like there's this kind of like deteriorating public health system. These community groups are trying their best to sort of fill the gaps, but clearly the demand is much greater than their capacity to fill those gaps.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's, we see that the demand is much greater. Kind of going into one of the later points is the sort of solutionism around, like private privatization supposedly taking the burden off of the
Right,
public
naturally.
health system.
Yeah. It's a classic formula.
Yes.
Let the public health system deteriorate, point at how it's deteriorating, and then let like the private sector kind of like take more and more of a hold of something that should not be for profit.
Exactly. Yeah. Which there's a parallel to that in terms of the neighborhood itself, of being allowed to kind of deteriorate and be sort of.
Well, it's funny that you say deteriorate because there are some players which would say the neighborhood is improving.
Yes, there are.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
they're capitalizing on that.
I'm kind of I'm speaking generally to the kind of I guess the marketing of like real estate, the people who kind of benefit off of gentrification. If you could give me a little portrait of gentrification in the neighborhood, because I think most of our listeners and watchers might not be familiar with the neighborhood. It's sort of like out east, but every now and then I see comments in like some little Montreal Facebook groups I'm in. Where they talk about how they go to the neighborhood now, and they talk about, oh, it's so much cleaner, it's so much kind of like nicer now. So could you give me a little portrait of the neighborhood and kind of what the gentrification has been like?
Yeah. Hochelaga-Maisonneuve, it's quite a large neighborhood. It's also like part of the Hochelaga-Maisonneuve borough. From just to kind of give like a sort of geographical picture. From the west to the east, it kind of goes from the Canadian Pacific Rail on the west. And if you can imagine, there's like the bridge that's like after Frontenac, and you go on to Ontario Est. And, it sort of starts around like Moreau. And then it goes all the way east to about the CN tracks around Viau. There are a lot of new condo buildings around that section.
I think we have a photo of one of those condo buildings. Yes. There we go. Yeah.
Well, yes, actually, this one it's a few blocks down from Viau, so it's actually quite illustrative of the redevelopment that's happening in that block. But so that's kind of west to east, and then south to north. It kind of spans from the Fleuve Saint-Laurent. Notre-Dame kind of goes all the way along the length of the neighborhood up to like Rue Rachel-Sherbrooke. Again, it is quite a large neighborhood, so there's there's income diversity within the neighborhood, but it is the contrast and the disparity is becoming more evident within the neighborhood,
right?
With the redevelopment, whereas before it used to be a little bit more of like Hochelaga-Maisonneuve in contrast with the rest of Montreal. So the gentrification process has been sort of underway for about 20 years. It started in the early 2000s, and it's kind of followed the typical template of new condo developments, renovictions, and a sort of a rebranding exercise. The neighborhood, it has a higher concentration of social housing in Montreal, and a lot of rental, like lower income rental housing, has been left to deteriorate and kind of fall into disrepair by slumlords. This is a picture. So this is a photo of a building with some 2.5 like smaller apartments. The building is in absolute disrepair. So this is it's located kind of on the far end of Sainte-Catherine Est. The experience of actually going down Sainte-Catherine is it's the contrast becomes very apparent as you kind of pass P9, which is the big throughway that goes to the north.
Right. That's like right next to the Olympic Stadium.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. So as you go like further east from there, the contrast just becomes more pronounced. So there used to be a lot of like mom and pop shops. So some dépanneurs, like old clothing stores, like not really trendy, but something to wear.
Of course.
And a lot of these shops are now standing vacant. And the sense of like, when you go down the street, like you're really surrounded, you're struck by the sense of absence of these, like, it's mixed like commercial real estate and apartments, but you really have this sense of like abandonment in the neighborhood. And a lot of these, this is just one example, but a lot of buildings are very visibly, they're crumbling.
Derelict.
Yeah. And if you peer through like the window, like the front door here, I mean, there's
of this building.
Yeah, you can see like there's like rubble everywhere.
Sure.
There's there was like a medical clinic also just a block down that has long since shuttered. So yeah, there's this real sense of the contrast is grotesque. When you look across the street from this building, there's this new development by company Lifa, and they're these glitzy, like sleek new condos, 5.5, so quite large, and it feels like it's grotesque, and it's just it's kind of shocking. If you go down the street every day, it becomes part of your.
Of course, but if you just take the second to like take it in, is like quite a disparity, I guess, between this old Hochelaga-Maisonneuve, which is much more like working class, poorer, and this new one that's sort of like cropping up within it.
Yes. Yeah, and again, it's just becoming like more evident that disparity within the actual neighborhood. The rebranding of the neighborhood is kind of its own discussion.
Yeah. I think we have I think our next slide is sort of touches on that. Yeah.
So it's just an example that kind of captures the spirit of the rebranding of Hochelaga-Maisonneuve.
Yeah. So what is this website we're looking at? So so we do have some listeners. So right now we're looking at a screenshot from a website called HP and Associés. They are it looks like real estate developers. And we have a section here that says cheap rents, and I guess they're sort of selling the. Oh yeah, I mean, I'll let you read it. I'll let you talk more about this, but.
Yeah, it pretty much it captures the spirit of it entirely. But yeah, even today, Hochelaga bears the imprint of its working class past and its social precariousness. Underpaid workers, precarious artists, prostitution, drug addicts, ellipses. The cliches attached to this underprivileged neighborhood speak volumes about the weight of its past. The reality is more nuanced. The social mix is more present than it seems. Hochelaga attracts today more young professionals and families with young children who see the potential of certain residences after a few strokes of the brush and other renovations.
After a few strokes of the brush, this is like, this is haunting.
Yeah.
I guess this is like inside the minds of the people who are kind of fueling the gentrification. We get to see a little bit about how they view the neighborhood and how they market it specifically, I guess.
Yes. Yeah, and
I think it's interesting just to hear how they're talking about the past, the social weight, like the weight of the past.
Yeah. Because the weight of the past, because it is a erasure, an active erasure, sort of in progress, both in terms of like the physical reality, but also the association, the neighborhood, the history of it. Like this is, it's gone now. Whereas
don't worry about that kind of stuff. Yeah, this is good for your kids now.
Yes.
Yeah. That's sort of their line of argument.
Yeah. And that's basically the neighborhood does have this association, like it's historically working class. It is also primarily historically primarily francophone, with high levels of poverty, and it has been associated with the sex work industry. One kind of example of erasure has been, so before COVID, there was a block that was known, in Montreal, known in Hochelaga-Maisonneuve for the sex work industry. It was frequented by workers. It was Moreau and Adam. So, this is a few years ago now, but since COVID, there are like police cars and police vans that are routinely parked just around the corner by the CP, the Canadian Pacific tracks, and just up the block, like that portion of the street around Rue Ontario and Moreau has been redeveloped. There's a new condo building that was built was completed about 2 years ago, and there's like new boutiques that have kind of cropped up in some of the industrial buildings, And the Loft Moreau was infamously renovated in 2013 when affordable artist studios, the building was allowed to fall into disrepair, and artists were renovated, and then the building was, it was basically redeveloped into new artist studios, but they were more
much more expensive. A classic.
Yeah, so all that to say that, this association with underpaid workers, precarious artists, prostitution, and drug addicts being, a thing of the past. The people, people in these industries, people with, this life, have always been there. They are still there, but they've just been.
They're trying to be. They're considered sort of a thing of the past. They're trying to be removed from whatever kind of public eye.
From the public eye.
Make things much more sterile, clinical, easier to sell.
Yeah.
To whoever's buying these condos there. So to come back to the topic at hand. So thank you for that kind of picture. I think that really kind of paints a picture of the last 20 years and the sort of shifting forces in the neighborhood. I'm kind of curious. Could you tell me more about the community organizations that you spoke to, worked with for this article?
Yeah. So the community organizations, so they're working within this context of sort of internal displacement within the neighborhood. So that, they're kind of filling the gaps here. But Le Table de Quartier Hochelaga-Maisonneuve is one of the organizations, Le Centre Marie Debout, and OPDS, the Organisation Populaire des Droits Sociaux. So Le Table is, it's a membership-based umbrella organization that's kind of made up of community organizations in the neighborhood. And they basically, their stated mission is to improve the lives of residents in the neighborhood, and they work across the board in different aspects like food security, health, and education.
They kind of help. I believe other neighborhoods have their own version of Le Table, or their own kind of neighborhood groups that form their own tables. I believe they do offer this sort of cohesion between these groups.
Yes. Yeah. So that's kind of what their role is to kind of liaise between these groups, which work in very disparate sectors.
Right. Just in the same neighborhood.
Yeah. And just to kind of get a sense of what is, what's the portrait of the neighborhood at the moment, what are the needs of the neighborhood, and, what are community groups kind of seeing or needing. And they do research and surveys. So some of their work actually informed the article.
Incredible.
But I spoke with the interim executive director, Jonathan Allary. And then La Marie Debout is a women's center. It's just off of P9 and Sainte-Catherine. And they provide social support for women in the neighborhood, workshops on different social issues, the community activities, and they also engage in community activism. And they do serve women across socioeconomic levels, but they a portion of their community is lower income women. I spoke with the coordinator, Fanny St. Pierre, and she also emphasized that there are a lot of older women and older women who are living in isolation who end up coming to the center. They have computers set up so that women can access the internet, if they need to fill out forms or, do work.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And then Organisation Populaire des Droits Sociaux, OPDS.
Nice. We have a picture of their community space. It's a picture of their front. We see
just the front,
yeah, just the front, the door. We see a little IWW logo. Tell me about them.
Yeah, so they're more of a militant group, and they work more independently. So they are not members of La Table. Marie Debout is a member of La Table. But OPDS basically organizes to advocate for the rights of people who are living on social assistance or who want to apply for social assistance. And they also organize the community activities, and they help people fill out applications and forms, and they also act as a little bit of a community center. So some people in the neighborhood have been coming to the center for many years. So yeah, and they're also kind of centrally located on Rue Ontario, which is that street on Main Street there. So they are like, yeah, they're located within, again, the heart of the neighborhood. And yeah, the photo just kind of shows one of the issues that I'll kind of talk about here. But yeah, they're not really an accessible space. This is kind of illustrative of some of the issues facing the neighborhood. A lot of buildings are not accessible for wheelchairs, or people using walkers or canes. One of the characteristics of Hochelaga has been that there's a higher population of older people. So the need for accessible accessible buildings. I mean, it's needed everywhere, but and this is a center that serves people who are living in poverty or in very vulnerable conditions. So when I was leaving the interview, there's a community member who also kind of coordinates with the center, and he uses a wheelchair, and he needed to be helped out of the building for an accessible bus to help him get to where he needs to go.
Right.
But there's all kinds of issues with
accessibility. The conditions of the sidewalk. It's a little out of focus, but it does not seem so fresh.
No, there are. It's one of the issues. It's this is again a sort of an intersectional lens. There's so many layers to physical accessibility to social services and community centers. But potholes. Streets that are kind of falling apart. Stairs where you really don't need them. Right.
No, classic. Could you continue on this topic of accessibility? Because I think that, like you were saying, this is kind of like this huge intersectional, I think was a good word to describe this huge issue that kind of covers so many fronts, right? Because it's not only, you have this one angle of physical inaccessibility, right? With the kind of conditions of the sidewalks, how buildings are not really fit to be accessible to those who have mobility issues. But then I think you also talk about the accessibility of these services as well, not even on the physical lens, right? But just the difficulty of accessing them. Could you speak more on that?
Yeah, so this is kind of where the article addresses this point that there's kind of these two pressures. So on one hand, the erosion of the public health and social services network, the inability of the public network to actually address people's needs. And then also the pressures of gentrification. So they're acting together to kind of compound the pressures on people who are living in very vulnerable conditions in the neighborhood. So yeah, there's a lot.
Yep. Yeah. We have an unfortunately long list of sort of issues here.
Socially, unfortunately long list.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll go through them. I mean, one issue that's particular to Hochelaga-Maisonneuve was the retirement of a family doctor a few years ago, who was located on Rue Ontario. And I was told that now, a couple years later, people are still without a family doctor. I think there was that statistic of just over 40% of
42% of men,
42% of
23%.
Yeah. So it's quite significant, and people have been left without a doctor, somebody to follow their dossiers.
Of course.
So
these people used to have that kind of regular, incredibly sought after kind of privileged thing, right? To have this family doctor, and he retired, which obviously happens, but I think this is clear to show that as these doctors retire, there's not really any solutions. It's not like these. It's not like his patients got transferred to someone else. They're sort of left. Just left in the wind.
Exactly. Yeah. And again, with one of the issues that's commonly raised with the erosion of the public health sector, that was a big point in the
Commune Front,
protests over the past 2 seasons, is the inability for the public sector to retain doctors, retain basically all staff. But people are just falling through the cracks. And in a neighborhood like Hochelaga-Maisonneuve, where there are it's a lower income neighborhood, social disparities are more prominent, that it has a significant impact, especially when people they're older and maybe they've had the same doctor who's been following their dossier for many years, and now there's nobody to follow up, or if they do manage to find somebody, they're kind of starting from scratch.
Right.
A lot of that relationship with a doctor is also very personal. Like it's not an impersonal, again, sterile experience. Like medical services, like it's very intimate.
Of course, the doctor knows you. He knows
yeah.
the history of your health, so it doesn't feel like every time you're going in, it's like something new, something that you're not just like I don't know, like you're not just like a new number for whoever doctor. You have someone who's familiar with, I guess, how your body works and how it doesn't
Absolutely.
work.
Yeah, and it's also, this was something that was talked about by Hind Fazazi from OPDS, but there's like a sense of, okay, I'm adding this bit in, I'm saying this bit.
Yeah, let's hear it.
But there's a sense of trust, like you have to, trust the medical service provider, your social worker, what have you.
It's a relationship like any other, right? So like over time you become you're in a relationship with this kind of doctor and you get to know each other, you get to trust each other, but that's sort of not quite there if you're kind of going into clinics over and over, seeing new doctors.
Yes. Yeah, and just to kind of get to the bit that Hind Fazazi had mentioned was the hostility and abuse within the public health network. Women. She was speaking specifically with the women's committee at OPDS, so she was kind of bringing some insight from that. But people are just they're afraid to go to hospitals. They're afraid to go to the CLSC. They kind of expect to be treated poorly, and this is a frightening situation to be in, especially if you're dealing with an emergency, or you don't know what's wrong, or maybe you know what's wrong, but you don't think that you're going to be treated well.
Of course, yeah.
So there's that. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask about I think it's interesting because you have this kind of deteriorating, or this diminishing presence, right, of like kind of like public health, the institution of public health in Hochelaga-Maisonneuve. And I think what was interesting about the article to me was this one thing about, I guess, this measure of disadvantagedness, this kind of look, because like I guess in my head what I'm trying to say is essentially like you have less public health, you have more private health, and obviously this private health is available to this kind of new growing population in Hochelaga-Maisonneuve, which is this population of the higher income, the people who are buying these kinds of new condos, right? And I guess one thing I really thought was interesting was how this new population is sort of skewing statistics that some of these organizations and that the public health infrastructures use. Could you speak on that specifically?
Yeah, that's an important point. It was brought up both by OPDS and La Table de Quartier as well. La Table in particular because they had done like surveys. They created a portrait, portrait de quartier. And this is kind of a sense of statistical invisibility. There are two examples to kind of illustrate this. So one example is subsidized like school lunch programs. There was an instance where these school lunch programs were cut in schools in Hochelaga, and obviously this is very controversial. They were brought back. But what had happened was that the higher income of some of the families of students in a school, they were skewing the average income for the student body, and it was deemed like, oh, okay, well, these programs aren't really necessary.
Right. So, you have like because of this new kind of like population, you have sort of these income averages sort of going up into whatever section that the governing bodies are like, oh, so the average or the mean is sort of high now, so we don't need to offer this service.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's disproportionate because there's the same students are there. In any other instance, like people on lower income are still there, but it looks like they're not.
Right. Yeah.
Or it looks like maybe the neighborhood
across the board things are slowly going up, but it's really these kinds of outliers that are bringing they're skewing these numbers.
And there's another example that Jonathan Allary from La Table had brought up, where you can have like a condo on the same block as like low income, say low income seniors housing or like social housing. And once a condo is built, the representation of that postal code is going to be changed. It's going to look like that postal code is actually richer, just because of this one building. And you can kind of see how that can have a domino effect, even just on the perception, which kind of goes back to that the realtor website. And
Right.
The shift, like, yeah.
This image of a neighborhood that's being sold. Yeah.
And I mean, this kind of some of the other issues are the availability and affordability of public transit. The hospitals, I believe I mentioned this earlier, but the hospitals are located quite far. So obviously, if you have an emergency, it can be difficult.
We have the next slide sort of speaks to this a little bit.
A little bit. It doesn't.
Yeah. So this
doesn't show the hospitals. It
right.
shows the
Only the
CLSCs.
CLSCs.
So basically, they provide like vaccination, regular checkups, and psychosocial services. And it kind of like, the thing is, on the map, they look a bit closer than they actually are.
Those are very large distances.
Yeah, I mean, considering like
Of course.
Montreal as a whole, proportionally, like, it can seem not far, but it is. There's also like, they're little things, but they're just part of daily life. Like, there's the hill that you have to kind of go up. It can be very difficult.
Especially for an aging population, like you were saying.
Yeah, and I think Allary had mentioned, like, some services aren't offered at the CLSC de Hochelaga-Maisonneuve, so you have to go elsewhere.
To the further one.
You go to Rosemont, and actually, to get from down in the south part of the neighborhood, where it's also like a higher level of like lower income residents in social housing, like you might not be able to afford to take a bus, so you have to walk, and there is a pretty steep, like relatively steep hill to get up and get to Rosemont. And I mean there's that.
Of course, this issue of physical inaccessibility, or this kind of distance between these health centers. Could you? I think one thing I thought was interesting in our conversations was this thing about you'll see this very often, right? Where you have kind of like governments, public bodies who try to like sell this idea of like, we are innovating, we are modernizing our services. That usually means there's this sort of digitalization of some things, where you have some of their services that are available either online, sometimes solely online, or through your phone. And I think you make this interesting point about how that, as much as it sounds like, as much as for certain population it makes it more accessible, for others it makes it less accessible.
So this was a point that was kind of raised across the board by the community organizations, and this is also like an area where they're sort of stepping in to help members of the community actually like get into the system, whether it's like getting medical appointments or like social, accessing social services or filling out forms. So it's just a point that's kind of overlooked often, this technocratic solutionism, of like, let's build an app for it. A lot of these apps are they're compatible with like higher like more newer models of phones. There's also like issues with like user experience. Some of these apps, like, they have small fonts. At Centre Marie Debout, Fanny Saint-Pierre had mentioned that they often help, like the center often helps older women who come in, try to set an appointment, for whatever service they need, and they're having troubles navigating the platforms. They can't, read the text, and it's just like, user experience. It's this little detail, but it's not really maybe considered through an intersectional lens very often. There's also like a frequently, platforms are frequently changing, or like you have to go to one platform and then suddenly there's a change. You have to use another platform to set your appointments. It's like Rendez-vous, Santé Québec, Clic Santé. Bonjour Santé.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go too much into it,
Yeah, I'm
but
getting a
it
headache.
is. I do want to mention that it does kind of introduce a little bit of an opening for corruption. I mean, there's always openings for corruption in everything, but there's the case with Tudelo, who created this app that kind of stratified. They were working on Bonjour Santé, and they had stratified like access to services, so you could pay for priority
Access.
Access.
That's great. We love that in a public institution.
Yeah, it's so like
Well,
app-based like technocratic solutions again. Are they really the way to go?
no.
Do they consider the people who are most vulnerable, who are living in poverty, who don't have access to laptops and phones, and who have to go somewhere physically to ask for help? Can you please help me fill out this form? If they can even get into the building.
I'm gonna take a guess and say no.
No.
I do not believe those private companies who are tasked with creating these technocratic solutions care about that population.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. It's not reflected in the solution.
Definitely not.
Proposed solution. And which leads into the next point on literacy. Because this is quite a big point. In the neighborhood, the Fondation pour Alphabétisation, according to the 2021 report, just under 46% of respondents don't have a level of literacy that would be considered by the Fondation to be like sufficient to be functional in society, in our technocratic society. So that is quite significant. It's quite reflective of the reality for the neighborhood, on many different levels. But it just kind of situates, like, if you're being offered this this technical solution, to use an app, as like administrative workers are, fading out of the public health and social services network, you're relying more and more on apps.
Of course.
You can see how it can present more challenges if you're already navigating, with like maybe there are issues with dyslexia, maybe you just don't know how to read and write.
Right.
Like these are realities for people.
And then these services are even more locked away from them, or kind of put further out of reach.
Yeah. And yeah, it's just a layer that's kind of taken for granted. Like, oh, we'll give you an app, we'll slap an app on it, and you will deal with it. You'll get a better job, and you'll work harder, and you're gonna make more money, and you'll be able to afford that new phone to set your rendezvous with a private doctor.
In your brand new condo.
In your brand new condo.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Quite a grim.
Yeah, this is I guess sort of the I guess we're the natural end, right, towards these kinds of trends is you have these more and more of the population of these kinds of neighborhoods that are going under immense kind of social economic change. You have these populations that are just slowly kind of like either left outside the system and barely even like reach. And like you have these populations that are left outside of the reach of these services that are already crumbling. And then you have these community groups that are trying their best to sort of bridge that. But clearly it's like, I mean, like it's incredibly noble and I think important work that they do to make sure that some of these populations are still reached out to and helped. But it is quite an uphill battle, I would say.
Yeah, and actually, OPDS, for example, again, they kind of work independently, and they actually had like funding cut from like a major charity funder as well. So a lot of these community groups are kind of losing their ability to even, like have people on staff or like do things.
I mean, it's like they're losing these like charity funding. This charity, the money, right? The funding that requires them to do the work that already the government should be doing, but it's clearly not really in their interest to do.
Yeah. Again, I think
maybe not in their interest, I would say, because I do believe a lot of these health workers do want to do this work, but they just don't have the resources or the support to do it. Yeah,
and actually, one of the quotes in the article for Pivot is Fanny Saint-Pierre saying that they're I'm just paraphrasing here, but that they are patching the gaps, but they shouldn't be doing this. That these services should be available in the public health and social services sector. The fact that they have a nurse on staff is great, but for example, sex workers should feel comfortable going to the public,
Of course.
health system. They shouldn't be afraid. They shouldn't have to, worry about like, police getting involved somehow through the public health system. They shouldn't have to seek out alternatives.
Of course. So it's like it's almost like maybe it's obvious to point out, but it's in the name, right? It's supposed to be public health. It's supposed to be things, this institution that's available to anyone in the public to be able to use to get these services. And it's a shame that you have this section of the population, like sex workers, among others, who are sort of nervous about using these services because of these prejudices that exist within it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We're sort of running low on time here, so I might ask us to skip ahead. I guess talking about like now going on like a much broader scale about these kinds of changes in the health and the public health kind of like industry, public health network. You kind of talk about Bill 15 a little bit.
Yeah. So it was mentioned. The community organizations talked about it a bit. At the moment, like it's not quite clear, like on the community level, how it's going to impact, but you can kind of like there are some parallels to concerns that have been raised on a regional level. So, for example, in the Outaouais, in Gatineau Hall, there were like within the past month or so, there were protests by the community health networks that really highlighted a concern with the creation of Santé Québec and the perceived like the perception that there might be a loss of autonomy and kind of specificity within regional health and social services networks to be able to address needs that are very specific to those regions. So I mean the public health and social services network is already not able to address those needs, but then if they're losing a kind of a sense of autonomy or like specificity. That's particular to the regional
because of this increasing centralization, I believe it is to Bill 15.
Yeah, and it's been like presented as decentralization, but their argument is that no, it's actually more centralization.
They love to do that.
Yeah, and I mean it's also shifting accountability away from Christian Dubé, the position of the Minister of Health, towards the state-owned corporation Santé Québec. So that's also a concern. But yeah, what this is pretty much saying is that you can anticipate a kind of domino effect, on a regional level into like smaller communities, like Montreal, and then like Hochelaga-Maisonneuve as a neighborhood. Community organizations, they just like the people I spoke with did kind of emphasize this concern, like. We're not really sure right now what it's going to look like, what the impacts are going to be, but we are concerned about like the loss of specificity and our ability to address needs that are very specific to Hochelaga-Maisonneuve.
Of course.
Like CLSCs again, the CLSC de Hochelaga-Maisonneuve kind of losing some services. And again, people turning to community organizations to fill those gaps. That's kind of like, that's already happening.
Right.
What's it going to look like later down the road? How many more gaps are going to be opened once you lose some specificity in like regional and other forms of like public health administration?
Yeah. I think I guess now to end on this question, I guess. Do you feel like these currents in Hochelaga-Maisonneuve are unique to Hochelaga-Maisonneuve, or do you think it's like what do you think is an important takeaway when we look at this, when you're giving us this portrait of this neighborhood?
Yeah, I think some of these are particular to Hochelaga-Maisonneuve.
Right.
So again, looking at like some demographic aspects, like an older population, some of the geographic aspects, like
of course, like the
mobility, So yeah, some of it is particular, but I think the trend is just pretty, like it's across the board, across Montreal. You can look at other like lower income neighborhoods. Pointe Saint Charles, I think, went through like this whole wave of gentrification. I can't speak to the specificities of like, how community organizations were patching up gaps there, or like what the specific needs for the public health and social services network was in Pointe Saint Charles. But like the pattern of gentrification and the I suppose the disenfranchisement of people from their own neighborhoods, their own like community homes is I want to say pretty universal. And yeah, I think just generally like the concern and just the general like reflection of the erosion of the public health sector is, yeah, it's very concerning. It's like you're treating public health and social services as a commodity, or like they're increasingly being treated as a commodity and a privilege rather than a basic human right. The way that this looks can be quite banal, but in a big picture, it's very disturbing, and it's this like long march of the erosion of Quebec's public health and social services network. So,
Lital, thank you very much for coming onto the show, giving us this intimate, detailed portrait of the sort of gaps in health and social services in Hochelaga-Maisonneuve, as well as what community groups are doing to combat them and bridge them.
yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. That's it for our main show, folks. Stay tuned. In 20 minutes, we will be starting Hello Good Bylines. Stay tuned. Hello, hello, hello. Good Bylines. The name of the show, the name of the program. Today, Savanna Craig returns on this March 27 to discuss some of the coverage you've been doing, Savanna. How are you first?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. I hear there are some people on a hunger strike at McGill.
There are some people on a hunger strike.
Tell me about it.
Yes. So it is now day 38, where activists, student activists at McGill have been hosting a hunger strike. Essentially, they have been hosting a hunger strike in support of Gaza, and they say that they won't stop until McGill divests from companies that contribute to Israel and impose an academic boycott on Israeli institutions. Essentially, I met with a few of the activists a couple weeks ago, but things with the situation are developing quite fast. One of the initial hunger strikers, Rania, she ended her hunger strike a few days ago at day 34. She was actually hospitalized and required for health reasons to end the hunger strike. But there are currently 2 hunger strikers who continue. And there was one relay hunger striker. So essentially she was going on and off of the hunger strike. Right now she's not participating in the hunger strike and focused on organizing actions.
Gotcha. So I imagine these demands. I imagine was it a few months ago we had the student population at McGill sort of vote on a referendum asking them for this, asking McGill, voting on getting McGill to sort of divest from money and connections they have attached to people and lobby groups that are sort of involved with Israel and the Israeli occupation. Do you see this as a sort of continuation of that effort?
Yeah. In a video that we'll check out in a few moments, one of the former hunger strikers, Bogdan, we were just chatting a little bit on camera about, why are you doing this hunger strike? And essentially he had given me this long list of actions that McGill students were participating in, such as the ones you've mentioned. We've seen people on the streets, especially McGill students on their own campus, but people outside of campus, protesting. And he was essentially saying, we're doing sit-ins, we're protesting, we're boycotting, all of these things. And this was just another step in order to continue to apply pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
We could check out that clip to see what some of the hunger strikers had to say.
Let's.
We are not eating. We are taking a stance and saying if you're going to put other people's health on the line, then we'll put ours in order to draw attention to this and to say that we don't agree and that we want it to change.
McGill students have been on a hunger strike for Palestine, with numerous activists striking for close to 30 days now. McGill has invested approximately $7 million in companies that manufacture arms and technology for the Israeli military.
We're asking McGill to divest from the genocide happening in Palestine and to commit to an academic boycott against Israeli institutions.
That money that we give to McGill is then being invested in these companies that then profit and contribute to the ongoing genocide. So that is McGill's role, and because McGill has chosen to take on that role, all the students have taken on that role.
Students say they've been in contact with McGill administration to organize a meeting in order to discuss their demands. However, organizers say that McGill has not been meeting their requirements, including only offering a closed-door meeting and only notifying them of a meeting only 48 hours in advance, when activists requested McGill notify them a week in advance. In response to a request for comment, McGill said that they offered to meet directly with the students at the earliest possible date, but that this offer was declined.
There's currently no standing university left in Gaza, and we should be outraged about the fact that
saying, we should be outraged about the fact that there are no universities left, and that McGill is essentially involved in what's going on, by funding companies or investing in companies that do essentially provide arms for Israel.
$7 million.
Yeah, at least $7 million. This was uncovered in an investigation by the McGill Daily. Essentially, they had gone through McGill on their website. They have documents listed showing companies that they've invested in. So essentially, through uncovering, what's in these documents, they did find some companies, and I went through it myself. I found Lockheed Martin, which often is a name that comes up, when we are talking about companies that are manufacturing arms for Israel. They have McGill has about over well over $500,000 invested in Lockheed Martin, and Lockheed Martin provides the Israeli militaries with F-35 fighter jets, the Hellfire 9X missile, and the M270 multiple launch rocket system. Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say pretty serious armaments, kind of serious weapons of war.
Yeah, that's probably, I think, one of the most notorious companies that they invest in, but one that's a little lesser known is Safran. They supply essentially biometric technology to conduct surveillance in the West Bank. So students, they're applying pressure not only for, divesting in companies that are, manufacturing weapons used in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. So, it's inclusive of all of Palestine. Another one is BAE Systems, which produces parts for F-35 fighter jets as well.
Yeah. So another investing money in companies that are either producing directly kind of aerospace technology, developing these jets, rockets, and or sort of biometric surveillance used to sort of keep a watchful eye over this population.
Absolutely. But for anyone who's interested in looking further, I mean, these documents are easily accessible on their website. So even, beyond Israel, you can see what else McGill is contributing towards. And I
how they use that student money.
Exactly. I know, the divest from fossil fuels movement has been big at Concordia. Concordia is now divested in McGill too, and I think
this was a movement specifically
for universities to divest in companies like fossil fuel companies.
Right. So this was a movement that set about to get these universities to divest their finances away from fossil fuel companies into, I mean, I guess not really into anything else, but just to get that money out of fossil fuels.
Essentially,
yeah. And I guess there's a similar movement here with these Palestinian support groups sort of trying to get the university to divest from these military and military contractor companies.
Exactly. Yeah, and there's been, specifically towards the hunger strikers, they've been essentially gaining a lot of attention for what they're doing. I first interviewed them a couple weeks ago, but since then, I've kind of seen the issue blown up.
On a global scale,
Yeah, on a global scale and locally as well. A lot of conversations are happening, around what these hunger strikers are up to, around the evolutions of this movement. At the last two Palestine protests that are hosted every Sunday, weekly in Montreal, there were speeches. The most recent one on Sunday, an activist within the movement gave a speech, and then the Sunday before that I had attended, two of the one activist from Palestinian Youth Movement and one activist from Montreal for Palestine shouted out these hunger strikers and essentially just tried to draw people's attention to what's going on and essentially advocating to support this movement.
Yes, incredible. So I think that global coverage. I mean, we were talking just now about this kind of global coverage these hunger strikers have been getting. There was an article in The Guardian, I believe, on this hunger strike, and I think something that was interesting that this video talks about too was people took issue with McGill's sort of line in that article. I think I believe it was Chatty in your video just here was speaking about actually no, you were talking about how there's this line that's sort of stated that it's McGill's trying to angle this as if the hunger strikers aren't willing to meet, right? As if the hunger strikers are kind of resistant to meeting, and it kind of paints them out to be sort of, I guess, what's the word? Uncooperative. But then it seems like that's not quite the case when you spoke to hunger strikers.
Yeah, we can. If you just want to switch the slides. So this is the article that Calden's talking about in The Guardian. Canadian students hunger strike for college to divest from Israel-linked firms. Several McGill University students have spent more than 3 weeks demanding schools divest $200 million from
20 million.
Sorry, $20 million from various companies. Thank you.
No problem.
So this is the article, and we can just check out the next slide for what McGill had said. So McGill on Friday issued a statement saying it's concerned about the well-being of students participating in this initiative. McGill essentially said that they respect the rights to free speech, free assembly within the limits of university policy and law. And they said that, they've repeatedly offered to meet with the student protesters directly, though they have so far declined. This offer still stands. We have clearly communicated the procedures available for expressing concerns about the university's investment holdings or for advocating policy changes. These students have chosen a different approach. Our hope is that they will understand that university policies will not be determined in this way before their well-being is affected. We urge them to make choices that prioritize their health. So this is McGill's statement in the Guardian article that we just looked at. And these hunger strikers, they have this Instagram account at McGill Hunger Strike, where essentially they provide daily updates and just essentially use this Instagram account as a tool to keep people informed and also to continue to apply pressure on McGill to divest. And they had essentially screenshotted and shared this article and said that they had conflicting views. They essentially addressed McGill's comment on following university procedures for divestments, and they responded saying that McGill evades these regulations seen in the divestment from the fossil fuels movement. Essentially, they were saying that activists in the divestment movement for fossil fuels have been applying pressure for about a decade, and it took this long for McGill to apply that pressure. And this is not something that they mentioned in this Instagram post, but I know that with speaking with activists, they have essentially, said to me numerous times and to the public numerous times, like, we don't have this long, like, we need to do this now. And I think that this is why they're, choosing such an intense form of resistance and putting their health on the line,
Right.
to just essentially show, it is our lives on the line, and it's thousands of Gazans on the line as well. Thousands of Gazans' lives on the line as well. In this post, they also said that, McGill is ignoring pleas from students to divest from companies arming Israel. I quote, McGill's statements to the media are disingenuous and aim to portray us as stubborn and uncooperative. We have not denied meeting them. And then, essentially, as we saw in the video we watched earlier, their demands in order to have a meeting with McGill is that they have a public meeting and a 1-week notice. Essentially, what McGill has repeatedly offered to these hunger strikers is a private meeting, closed-door meeting, with a maximum of 8 students. And the hunger strikers, they're not necessarily denying a meeting. They want the meeting to happen, but they're denying having a meeting under these conditions. So essentially, in their call out of what McGill said in this article, is that they're saying McGill is, disingenuous in how they're representing these hunger strikers, because the hunger strikers have not denied a meeting; they've just denied these conditions for a meeting.
Right. It seems like the main impediment to a meeting taking place is not really the hunger strikers, but just this kind of difference in the conditions, or the sort of the agreed upon conditions for a meeting. It seems to be quite different. And I guess that's not really reflected in the article, the Guardian article, especially by McGill's line. That line McGill gave makes it sound like the hunger strikers are sort of like resistant to any kind of dialogue, right? Which sort of does portray them as stubborn and uncooperative, especially in the way that McGill sets itself out to be. It makes them sound like they're very concerned about the health, and there's this kind of almost, I guess, paternalist tone to that. It's like, we care more about your health. We tried reaching out, but they haven't yet. But we urge you to kind of consider your health first. It seems like that's not quite the issue at hand. It seems like there's it's ungenerous depiction of the discrepancies that come from this meeting. I wonder if there's going to be any kind of negotiations, or sort of because I guess 2 days closed doors is not too, that would definitely put this group at a disadvantage to whatever, apply more pressure. But it's interesting to see how this is going to develop.
Yeah. And, even outside of The Guardian, there's been coverage by other outlets, such as Democracy Now! Reported on this situation about a couple weeks ago. But there's also been reports in the Middle East Eye, the New Arab, and a few other outlets I came across as well, non-Canadian, non-American outlets. So it really is on this international level, and
Of course.
especially, since this one protester was hospitalized, I think that gained a lot of attention. And I did notice, I thought it was interesting in the Guardian article, I think McGill was a bit more firm with them, whereas, when I reached out, McGill had this, I reached out to McGill for a comment before publishing my video. And essentially they said, I quote, "We respect students' rights to pursue political objectives and express political convictions. Our priority remains the health and well-being of the students participating in the hunger strike. We offered to meet directly with these students at the earliest possible date, but that offer was refused. We understand that this is an incredibly difficult time. We continue to work daily on this issue and to ensure that the health and safety of students remain at the forefront of our efforts." I think that it's, there is a lot of similarities
Between
the statement they gave me and the statement they gave to The Guardian.
Sure.
But I sense in the Guardian article they seem more firm.
Yeah.
And maybe that also comes from, this isn't just a local outlet covering this now. This is The Guardian.
Of course, yeah. This British publication, international attention, so they want to seem perhaps a little more firm, like you're saying, to a wider audience. I think there's something really interesting about their note about policy and law, because like if we look at that quote, McGill respects the right to free speech and free assembly within the limits of university policy and the law, which I think is kind of interesting given that they sort of went against that student referendum that happened, right? Because like if we think about that referendum that happened back in, what was it, like November, I think, where you had a huge record turnout for the kind of referendum that they had, that was completely within student policy. That was completely within the confines of McGill policy, of law, and they still went against it, right? They still kind of like decided to like ignore it. They called upon, like there's this kind of call upon the Quebec Superior Court even to call an injunction on to stop it, right? So it's like, I don't know. They want it to be about the law until it doesn't serve their interests, and then it's not really about the law. I find that's at least I think it's interesting to bring up law and policy when they've sort of acted even against that.
I know that with that case, I can't for the life of me recall exactly what the vote was. I think it was essentially to like uphold BDS, or essentially like.
Yeah. They called upon they called upon McGill to divest. Specifically, the language of the of that referendum was really notable because it has the student body that voted upon it. I think in upwards of 70%. It was like a super majority of the voters that voted in favor of it. They were specifically called out Israel as a genocidal, colonial and occupying force, and they're calling upon McGill to divest from any funds it has that has involved with that occupation, as well as connections and relationships that they have with groups that are involved with those kinds with that kind of like settlement, right? I think what was great about that referendum was I think the specificity of language and the kind of not the harshness is not quite the word, but it was really like kind of like pointed kind of a definition of Israel as a genocidal apartheid. Apartheid was one important word that I think was involved in that language, and you had the university sort of mobilized to block it, as well as other bodies. I know apparently B'nai B'rith was involved as well.
Yeah.
With the legal counsel.
I'm not too sure about McGill blocking it, but I know that it was a student at McGill was offended and essentially was in contact in some way with B'nai B'rith, who's representing them in that lawsuit.
Sure.
I can't recall McGill's actual response, but I do know that with students at McGill I've interviewed over the last few months, they've said that there's like a clear, McGill is clearly unsupportive of pro-Palestinian activism.
Right, yeah. There's this kind of natural institutional bias that comes with these investments, right? That comes with the work that's going to take to divest them away from these funds, which they believe to be profitable and better for, I don't know if it's better for the university, but I believe it to be better on a pure like profit line.
Absolutely. But McGill students, they are quite active. We've seen a lot of mobilization in Montreal over the last few months, but even just before coming on air now, I read online that students at McGill are currently blocking the entrances of 3 classes.
Right now?
Right now.
Wow.
Unless it ended in the last, however...
20 minutes.
20 minutes we've been talking. These are the faculties of engineering, management, and education, and these activists are saying that these departments are complicit in the occupation of Palestine and Israel's bombardment of Gaza. Just to be clear, from what I saw, it didn't seem that the hunger strikers were involved, that these were other organizations, pro-Palestinian organizations. But it just kind of goes to show that from many different fronts, there are activists there, continuing to apply pressure, whether sit-ins, blockades, mobilizations or hunger strikes.
Yeah. The effort continues. The effort continues.
Yeah, it does.
Well, thank you for bringing this on to Hello Good Bylines, Savanna. This is our last episode.
Yeah, it is.
Our last episode. For those listening, thank you for being a part of the journey. I want to thank everyone here at CUTV, Drew, Sophia, Ode, Neha, yourself, Savanna, Fraser, Marie-Fleur. I'm forgetting people. Clément, I think there's a lot of people who've been a part of this program, supporting it in different ways. And unfortunately, we gotta call to an end because sort of the funding was cut. But people can keep an eye on developments in Montreal. You're gonna be staying on with Local 5 and 4, and thank you, Savanna, for coming on to the show so many times and bringing your reporting to our audience.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for hosting this show. It's been great to watch.
Yeah. My pleasure, absolutely. This is the last one, folks. Take care of yourselves. Stay informed.